Hello everyone, welcome to Unit 2 in our study of Germany. Today we're going to be looking at the Dawes and the Young plans. These were financial plans set up to help Germany to be able to repay back their debt set out by the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. Our learning objective today is to write down how successful the Young and Dawes plans both were. Your starter, simply write numbers 1 to 6 on your sheets of line paper for your quickfire questions. So let's go ahead and get those things done now. Let's start off with our title, Dawes and Young, our learning objective, and put down our starter. When you're ready, you can go ahead and resume the video, and we'll be doing those 1 to 6 quickfire questions. So you've had a chance to do your quick fires, so let's have a look at the answers that we were looking for. So question number 1 was the failed takeover of the government because the workers refused to go on strike. So we'll know this, of course, as the cap putsch. And this was the hint that the workforce was striking and refusing to cooperate with the force that was taking over the government. Question number 2, Hitler was sentenced to. If you wrote 5 years, you are correct. He was sentenced to 5 years, but only served 9 months. Question 3, Germany's main industrial area. We learned this in our previous lesson. It was the Ruhr or the Ruhr Valley. Both are acceptable. Number 4, what is this an image of? Of course, it's Dolchstoss. And the English translation is, you got it right, it is to stab in the back. Number 5, what was the KPD? And it's the Communist Party. And we get KPD for the word Communist Party in Deutschland. That's how you say Germany in German. And number 6, a failed takeover in November of 1923. 1923 is the big hint for us. We will know that, of course, as being the Munich Putsch. So your job now is to make a mind map in your note. The center of the mind map will say problems in Weimar Germany. And your job is now to write down as many problems that Weimar was facing as you can remember from our first unit. So pause the video now, start off your mind map and get down a few ideas. When you feel that you've written down everything you know, you can hit play and we'll just go through a few of those key points. So a few of the possible ideas we should have could be war reparations were set very high, Weimar had very weak leadership, Germany was hyperinflated, they did have quite a small army at the time, Weimar was very unpopular, nobody really knew who was in charge, and there were many communist and nationalist uprisings. Now, the information we have here is all right, but we can take each one step further. So let's do war reparations were high, for example. We know the exact value that war reparations were set to. So we would write down underneath 6,600 million. Can you go ahead and finish off your mind map by writing one more point of detail about each of the key points that we've already listed? So for example, Weimar had weak leadership. We would write something along the lines of coalition governments. And just to take up the remaining points, Germany was hyperinflated. We know this was caused by the events in the Ruhr Valley in 1923. The army was limited to 100,000 soldiers. Weimar was unpopular for not fixing the economic problems as well as Dawes. Nobody knew who was really leading the country. Was it the chancellor, the president, or parliament? And there were different nationalist uprisings. We've learned about the Spartacist Cap Putsch and the Munich Putsch. So let's jump into some key words. As always, try to match them up in your head. First of all, pause the video now, see which ones you can figure out. When you're ready, resume. We'll take them up together and you can ensure they're recorded down correctly. So our first point, Dawes Plan. This was introduced in 1924 to lower Germany's overall reparations. Allied means Britain, France, and their allies. Passive resistance, this was an example of what happened in the Ruhr, opposition without violence. And the Reichsbank is the German National Bank. So looking at the reparation payments, we have 3 questions to answer. Don't worry about writing these down. Just see if you can answer them in your head. So Germany had to pay money back to the Allies as punishment. How much did they have to pay? And if you're saying 6,600 million, you're correct. Germany was having difficulty making these payments. Why was that? If your answer has something to do with after the chaos of the First World War, Weimar was struggling to solve problems and hyperinflation, you're right as well. And did anyone benefit from the payments? Well, to be able to answer that, we're going to have a look over to the right-hand side here. Now, this is how payments were being kind of passed around, if you will. So the USA would lend money to Germany. Germany would use that money to pay back reparation payments to the Allies. And then France would pay that money back to the USA as loans for equipment for the First World War. And the USA would take that same money and lend it to Germany. Germany would lend it back to Britain, and Britain would lend it back to the USA. So the money was essentially just going in a circle. So nobody really benefited from it. The money did allow Germany to make some more payments, but then that was paid from France back to the USA and from the USA back to Germany. So the money was just being passed around in a circle. No one really benefited from these reparation payments. So on this slide, we'll see the 3 key players involved in the Young and Dawes plan. So of course, Charles Dawes, he was a US budget director and creator of the Dawes plan. Gustav Stressman, he was a German politician. He served as the foreign minister for the Weimar government, and he was also chancellor for a very brief amount of time, but he was kind of the hero of the 1920s in Germany. And the time in which he was serving as foreign minister is known as what's called the Golden Age. Everything was doing much better in Germany than they were before he was in power. And lastly, we have Owen Young. He was an American businessman. He drafted some plans to help Germany not to be able to simply pay back the reparations, but to make those payments more manageable. So it's a good idea now for you to go ahead and just note down these men. So it's a good idea to put their name and a rough idea of who they were. So Gustav Stressman, we want to know he was a German politician and foreign minister, and Owen Young was a businessman. So these are the sorts of ideas we'd like to have. So pause the video, get a few points down, and when you're ready, go ahead and resume. So let's start off by talking about Gustav Stressman and his solution to the crisis. Now, what Stressman decided to do was to take the old currency and introduce a new one. So we took the old marks, which was the German equivalent of a pound, if you will, and because they were hyperinflated, he needed to get rid of them and reintroduce a new banknote that the people could trust. So what he did is he recalled all the marks back, and he had them burned and destroyed. And he introduced a new currency called the Rentenmark. And just to give you an idea of how hyperinflated Germany was, one Rentenmark, so that's like saying 1 pound, was the equivalent of 1,000 billion marks. So that's just to show us how overinflated the German economy was. Those old banknotes were not worth anything, and the new Rentenmark quickly got hyperinflation under control. However, Germans never did forget the issues they faced during hyperinflation, and we can relate this back to what we know about America during the same time. People never really trusted the banks again. They felt quite cheated by Weimar, and this was simply because they never received the money that they lost back. So if they lost their entire life savings due to hyperinflation, they didn't receive any of their life savings back from the government. So important points for us to know is that one Rentenmark replaced 1,000 billion old marks, and all the old banknotes were destroyed. It's also important for us to know that hyperinflation was now under control, and Stressman was seen as a national hero. Let's go ahead, pause the video, let's get those points down in our note, and when you're ready, you can go ahead and resume. So looking at the Dawes and the Young plans a bit more specifically, we'll need to know again a few more key points. So in 1923, Charles Dawes, he was sent over to Europe to sort out Germany's economy. Under his advice, he said the following things will need to be done. He said the German National Bank needs to be reformed. The old money needs to be called back and it needs to be burned. And this is something that Gustav Stressman is going to do quite well and actually end hyperinflation. The next thing that he did was arrange a plan with Stressman where he gave Germany a bit longer time to repay those reparation payments. But the big thing that the Dawes plan does is lends Germany 800 million marks. And that's going to kickstart the German economy and get some money injected into society and allow people to start buying things with money and being able to be paid for the work that they're doing. So these are going to be the key points from the Dawes plan. Now, the Young plan, what he's going to do is extend the payments by 59 years and cut the payments by 75%. This doesn't mean that Germany is going to pay back any less. They just have a lot longer time to make those payments back, and that's going to make these payments much more manageable. Now, because Germany is relying on loans from the USA, their prosperity is going to depend on the prosperity of America. So if America does well financially, Germany is going to do well financially. But we need to start thinking about what happens in the USA in 1929 and how this event is going to impact Germany. So I'm sure by this point you've heard enough from me. Now is the time to listen to a reading and make a few key point notes. So feel free to pause the video at any moment, be able to write down a few key points from the reading that you'll listen to, and then we'll be moving on to our final tasks of the lesson.
The Golden Age. In 1923, the Weimar Republic was on the verge of collapse, but, surprisingly, the crisis was the start of a period of stability and success. The period 1923 to 1929 was a time when the economy boomed and cultural life flourished in Germany. It is known as the Golden Age of Weimar. This dramatic turnabout happened because Germany was saved by two people, Gustav Stressman and Charles Dawes. Gustav Stressman, a nationalist politician, realized that something needed to be done to save Germany. He was the most important politician between 1923 and 1929, however he only survived as Chancellor of a coalition government for a few months. He was a leading member of every government from 1923 to 1929 and his main role was as foreign minister. His first action in 1923 was to organize the great coalition of moderate, pro-democracy parties in the Reichstag. At last, Germany had a government that could make laws. Under Stressman's guidance, the government called off the strike, persuaded the French to leave the Ruhr and changed the currency to the Rentenmark, which helped solve hyperinflation. Stressman also introduced reforms to help ordinary people such as job centers, unemployment pay and better housing. Economic developments 1923 to 1929. Charles Dawes was the U.S. budget director. In 1923, he was sent to Europe to sort out Germany's economy. Under his advice, the German Reichsbank was reformed and the old money was called in and burned. This ended the hyperinflation. Dawes also arranged the Dawes Plan with Stressman, which gave Germany longer to pay reparations. Most importantly, Dawes agreed to America lending Germany 800 million gold marks, which kick-started the German economy. Following a lowering of the war reparations after the Dawes Plan of 1924, further changes to the reparations came with the Young Plan in 1929. Owen Young. The committee that looked at the reparations issue was led by Owen Young, an American industrialist. It was a committee that had been appointed by the Allied Reparations Committee. The final plan was an attempt to support Germany through her financial pain. Payments were reduced by 3/4. The length of time Germany had to pay was extended to 59 years. Reparations were reduced to 37,000 million marks. A part of the Young Plan designed to support Germany was the actual requirement of repayment per year. Germany had to pay 1/3 of the amount required each year as part of a compulsory agreement, about $157 million. However, the other 2/3 only had to be paid if Germany could afford to do so in a manner that would not harm her economic development. Consequences of Stressman's leadership, Dawes and Young Plan. Successes. The economy improved with falling unemployment, rising factory production and more confidence. There was a rise in number of votes for political parties supporting democracy and the Weimar Republic. The Communists and Nazis did not do well in elections compared to the parties supporting the Weimar Republic. The Nazis had only 12 seats in the Reichstag in 1928. Problems. Treaty of Versailles was still in place and very harsh on Germany. The Locarno Pact made permanent the land that was lost under the Treaty of Versailles. The number of troops were still limited, therefore Germany still felt weak and defenseless. Germany continued to pay reparations. Voters were still suspicious of democracy. The Communists were still a potential threat. The Nazis were rebuilding their party organization. Important organizations in Germany, like the army and judges, not totally convinced about supporting the Weimar Republic. Germany's economic recovery depended on loans from the USA under the Dawes Plan. The politician responsible for Germany's relative improvement, Gustav Stressman, died in 1929.
So you've had a chance to listen to the readings, make a few key point notes, and now is the time to think and apply the knowledge that we've come across to what we already know from our American unit. There's no need to write any of these questions down, just to think through potential answers for each. I'd like to pause the video now and just go through these 4 leading questions and see if you can finish them off verbally. Once you've gone through them, go ahead and resume playing the video. We'll take them up together. So our first question, in the 1920s, the USA's foreign policy was, and we're hoping that we would say, isolationism. Remember, after the First World War, America decided they don't want to get mixed up in the affairs of Europe. They just want to focus on themselves. So this meant that the USA would not get involved in the affairs of other nations. And that means any kind of affairs, financial affairs, political affairs, military affairs, they were going to remain neutral and out of other countries' issues. The Dawes and Young plan, therefore, went against USA foreign policy by becoming involved in the financial affairs of Germany. They did the thing that they said they would not do, and that's getting involved in other countries' business. Now let's think of the Great Depression. We know that in October of 1929, it's going to hit America quite hard. So how will this impact Germany? Now, if you remember back to the Dawes plan, that injected 800 million gold marks into the German economy. And the moment the stock market crashes, banks started recalling the loans that they had out to local people in America. And this was no different than with the Dawes plan. The moment that the banks crashed in America, they called back that 800 million marks they lent to Germany, and Germany was now bankrupt. So you can think of this loan as essentially giving a friend of yours £10. Uh, and all of a sudden you need £10 to buy something. Well, the first person you're going to go to is the friend you lent it to, saying, you know what, I actually need that money back. And this was no different with the stock market crash. America needed as much money as possible back in their country, and that meant calling in the loans that they sent out to foreign nations. So our final task today, this is to complete the table that we see on the screen. So you need two columns, German contributions to the financial crisis and American contributions to the financial crisis. So go ahead and design that table. You can pause the video now, fill in as much as you can from memory, and when you're ready, hit resume and we'll take up possible responses together. So having a look at German contributions to the crisis, we should be mentioning something about Gustav Stressman, the creation of the Rentenmark, hyperinflation being solved, one Rentenmark replaced 1,000 billion marks, and it fixed the issue, but most Germans still did not trust Weimar because they never received their life savings back. American contributions, we have Owen Young and Charles Dawes. We have the the Dawes plan giving 800 million gold marks to Germany to help boost the economy, and the Young plan extending payments by 59 years and reducing them by 75%, making it easier for Germany to meet the conditions laid out by the Treaty of Versailles. And it didn't all work. The money was called back in 1929 when the stock market crashed, and this was a way for America to kind of recoup some of the money that they lost during the stock market crash themselves. So go ahead and finish that table off, and you're done for your lesson today.